Hello, and welcome to Mrs. Schlecht Explains How to Subtract Integers. So a couple of materials that you'll need to be successful for this activity: your Envision Math workbook, your math notebook for all that great note-taking, a pencil, and of course, a great attitude. First, I'd like you to turn in your book to page 30 and look at the top of the page under the Key Concepts section. So in that Key Concept box, there's this term I wanted to point out to you: additive inverse. I know that sounds kind of weird, but it's a term that you actually know. Inverse just means opposite. So what I'm asking you for is, can you do the opposite of addition? What would the opposite of addition?
Subtraction.
Subtraction, you're right. So then what's the opposite of subtraction?
Addition. Addition.
Addition, you're right. So one thing to keep in mind when you are either subtracting or adding these integers is to think about those opposite operations. Sometimes in order to undo addition, you might need to subtract something. But the inverse of that, sometimes you might need to add to undo that subtraction. So if you look at the Key Concepts box, you'll notice that there's also a number line. Notice that in that number line, we're using variables. We're using A and B to represent any number, right? So you'll notice that when I have A and I'm trying to take away B, that could be the same as saying that I am subtracting the opposite of B. So I know that that Key Concept box might sound a little weird, but now let's put it into practice. So for this first problem, I'd like us to look again at page 30, but question number 6. And there's 4 different parts to question number 6. So this is the first part. Part A for number 6, we have 41 minus 275. What I'm going to do is I'm going to solve this with an additive inverse, which means I'm going to take this subtraction and turn it into an addition problem. So here you can see I took the same problem, which was 41 minus 275, and I simply rewrote it using that additive inverse. So now I have 41 plus that negative 275. And if you recall about adding integers, when I have 2 integers that are opposite signs, one being positive, one being negative, I first find the difference between their absolute values. So what's the absolute value of 275?
275.
You're right, it's just 275. And now, what's the absolute value of 41?
41.
You're right, it's 41. So now we can think about this problem as 275 minus 41. And now it's just basic subtraction. 5 minus 1, we all know is 4. 7 minus 4, we all know is 3. And then 2 minus nothing, we know is 2. But wait, there's more! What sign does this number have? Yes, I know that my digits are going to be 2, 3, 4, 234, but is that going to be a positive 234 or a negative 234? Did you say negative? You're right, it is going to be a negative number. Remember, from adding integers, it said that if I am adding 2 integers that have opposite signs, so a positive and a negative, I then subtract the 2 absolute values so that I'm able to get the absolute value of the sum, which in this case, 234, but I take the sign away from the bigger number, the number that has the largest absolute value. And if we're looking at our problem, which number has a larger absolute value, 41 or 275? 275. And since that's negative, our answer also needs to be negative. Let's look at another problem. All right, here's our next problem. This is 6b on page 30. Our problem here is negative 15 minus 47. Let's look at this with our additive inverse to help us out. Here we are. So we wanted to rewrite this problem using the additive inverse. This is what it would look like. I went from negative 15 minus 47 to negative 15 plus a negative 47. Again, same value in these 2 equations. It just looks a little bit different so that my brain is able to figure out these calculations. And now let's refer to adding integers. Do you remember what happens when I'm adding 2 integers that have the same sign?
You just add the numbers together.
You're right, you just add the numbers together. So what's 15 plus 47? If you can't do 15 plus 47 in your head, that's okay. That's why Mrs. Schlecht wrote it on the board like this. Let's do this one together. 5 plus 7 is 12. I put my 2 down there, then I gotta carry that next 10 over to the tens column, right? Now I have 1 plus 4, which is 5, plus that extra 10, which would give us 6. So this tells us the answer to 15 plus 47 is 62. But 62 what? Let's look back at our original problem. So now we know that the number that will be our sum is 62, but we're not done yet. Is that going to be a positive 62 or a negative 62? Well, look back at your problem. Notice that when I'm adding two numbers that have the same sign, they get the same sign. So that would be a negative 62. We could also think about it like this. 47 is the highest absolute value between these two terms. Therefore, our answer is going to have the same sign as the number that had the largest absolute value, in this case 47. Since 47 is negative, that also tells us that 62 will be negative. All right, so again, here is problem number 6C on page 30. We have negative 72 minus a negative 151. How could I write this problem using that additive inverse? If you remember your adding integers rules, when you are trying to add two integers that have different signs, remember you first try to find the difference between the absolute values. Absolute value of 151 is 151. The absolute value of negative 72 is 72. So we're first going to subtract those two numbers.
Are you thinking like, oh my gosh, 151 minus 72 in my head, Mrs. Schlecht? You want me to do that in my head? There's no way. Chill out, I'm not asking you to do it in your head.
I wrote it down too. See? Remember, this is just subtraction. All of our same subtraction rules that we've been using since first grade still apply. 1 minus 2, I need to regroup. So I'm going to come over here to my 5 tens. That becomes a 4, and I take over that extra 10 and I put it next to my 1. So now I have 11 minus 2, which is 9. Oops. And now I have 4 minus 7. I need to regroup again. So I'm going to take that 100, make that 0, and bring that 100 over to my tens. So I now have 14 tens. 14 minus 7, can I do that? You bet, it's going to be 7. And now I have 0 minus nothing. So this tells me the difference between the absolute values of negative 72 and 151 is 79. But let's apply it back. So we now know that negative 72 minus a negative 51 is going to give us the digits of 79. But will that be a positive 79 or a negative 79? Well, let's look. When we use this additive inverse, you'll remember that the number that has the largest absolute value, we will take that sign. We'll use that same sign for our answer. So in this case, the number with the larger absolute value is 151. Therefore, since that is a positive number, 79 as my answer is also going to be positive. All right, and here's our last problem that we'll look at. This is 6D on page 30. 612 minus a negative 144. Well, first, let's write it using that additive inverse. All right, so here's our problem just rewritten using that additive inverse. You'll notice, again, when I'm subtracting a negative number, that's the same as just adding that positive integer. So instead of having 612 minus negative 144, we can think of this problem as 612 plus that positive 144. Now we just add. And again, if you're kind of thinking, how do you even add all those big numbers, Mrs. Schlecht? It's just impossible. It's not impossible. It's not. Here's how you do it. I wrote 612 plus 144. I'm going to add up my ones, add up my tens, add up my hundreds. Done, right? So 2 plus 4 is 6. I put my 6 down here. 1 plus 4 is 5. And then 6 plus 1 is 7. So this tells me that When I add 612 plus that positive 144, my answer will be 756. But let's think. Will that be a positive 756 or a negative 756? It would just be positive. Again, if we look at our addition problem down here, remember, you take the sign from the integer that has the largest absolute value. In this case, it's pretty nice because they're both positive and therefore it's the same sign. I know I'm going to put the same sign for my answer. So my answer would be a positive 756. That was Mrs. Schlecht explains how to subtract integers. If you have any further questions, please let me know.